Utility Monster is a giving what we can leader, high school student. But high impact careers always seems to talk about things in terms of lives saved, i.e. I've never heard them mentioning other things to donate to. Utility Monster. That's exactly the right thing for high impact careers to do. Talk about lives saved with their public face, let hardcore members hear about X risk, and then in the future, if some excellent X risk opportunity arises, direct them to X risk. Anything for the pod, right? Anything for the pod.
Nice. Yeah. That's very Harry Potter of you, doing it in a broom closet. I've always known you were somewhat magical. Now I know why. Spending all your time in a broom cupboard.
So it's so funny. So Georgia, a friend of hers, left just a magical wand. And so we're having fun with the wand. Just in the last couple months, like a little meme is she'll say like freeze. And then I'll like freeze just because it's fun. Nice. But then she was doing it to another friend of ours at over on Friday, and then he just started playing along freeze. And then all of a sudden, like everyone at the party started freezing, and I'm like convinced that she actually has this power now, and it's the cutest thing ever because she told a crew of 20 people to freeze, and everyone just like did this, and then we stay paused still unfreeze. So there's a bit of wizardry and running in our family.
Wow, nice. You're going to be in trouble when she goes to the public park and tries it. You're going to have to be paying people off left, right, and center.
Right. Like whacking the wand. What the heck's going on here?
yeah, exactly. Tapping it against the side of her head.
It almost is a superpower, just the confidence that she has, It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. The hope and trust in her eyes that you will freeze would just freeze most people, probably.
Exactly. So how are you? How are your New Year's and Christmas? Welcome back. First episode of 2026.
First pod after the break.
Well, so our previous episode, the one we released before the break, got a bit of good feedback, which was surprising because it was like an off the cuff Patreon episode about introspection. But we got a great email from a listener that I would love to read out because I thought it contained a lot of really nice, insightful gems. Brilliant email from Dr. Jake Taber, who is allowing us to quote him with permission. Well, actually, let me set this up a tiny little bit for anyone who had missed the previous episode. So we were kind of talking about what are the limits of introspection? What are the benefits of it? When can it go wrong? And we started talking about therapy and all this. And we didn't really answer that question at all. But Jake has some really nice insights to offer here. So he says, I wanted to offer one possible way to think about the limits of introspection. And this thought may be so obvious that it's useless. But one angle is to consider introspection as useful until it turns into rumination. Early on in self-analysis, introspection is genuinely generative because you're covering new internal ground. But once you're relitigating the same insights without discovering anything new, it can become self-defeating rather than illuminating. It's that moment where introspection becomes a treadmill and we confuse motion with progress. Great line at the end there. So what do you think? What do you think about that? I really like that. That keep an eye out when you are introspecting or when you essentially just start running in circles and you're just covering the same ground over and over and over again, and no new terrain is being uncovered. And that to me is just like one of those brilliant insights that you can, that at least I will be actually trying to use going forward, because I totally know the state of mind when I'm just starting to run in circles. And so I throw that to you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this kind of makes me realize that I actually don't have a good model of my own thought process and how often I'm actually generating novel thoughts. And maybe that just means I'm actually ruminating all the time without realizing it and never actually doing any sort of genuinely generative introspection. But surely it can't be the case that it's only healthy to be covering new terrain, right? Surely there should be insight to be found when like sometimes you are going to cover the same territory again and again, and then eventually have a breakthrough or something. And then maybe you just want to say, well, before I had the breakthrough, this was useless. But then after I had the breakthrough, this was useful. But then you have to ask yourself, well, would I have had the breakthrough without the rumination? So I guess, yeah, one question I'd actually have for him is rumination always bad? Like, is there a place for rumination? Is there a place for sort of treading the same ground? Or, yeah, perhaps more accurately, is it possible to have a genuinely healthy introspective life without sometimes falling into rumination? It would be surprising to me if it was possible to be like purely introspective in the sense that he lays out all the time without ever slipping into like sort of retreading the same ground without necessarily generating new insight.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think of rumination as a negative thing, but maybe we can distinguish it from thinking repeatedly without covering new ground about positive thoughts and positive memories. Like there are certain moments in my life that have gone well, and sometimes I like to think about that. Sometimes I like to think about that, and I don't uncover any new territory. But that to me wouldn't count as rumination. Rumination, I think, is like a negative emotional state because you're unable to stop thinking about something that's not giving you progress, not causing you to solve any of the problems that you're thinking about, and also making you unhappy. If you're thinking about that one awkward comment you made at the bar 15 years ago over and over and over again, perhaps that's not, which I do. Typically it's not 15 years ago, it's my entire life. But so I'm kind of scattering a little bit, but part of me is also thinking about like John Cleese stuff, right? Mm-hmm. John Cleese stuff where he talks about how you need to have these moments of deep focus and then these moments of just free association. Because we're not saying that you can't get new insights over territory that has been tread many times before. But I do think it's pretty valuable to consider that, like, if you have just been thinking about the same thing for 20 minutes as you're falling asleep and you're just making yourself miserable and you hear your thoughts reoccur, like you think something, then you think something else, and then 15 seconds later you think that same thing again, then perhaps we might want to switch into like the free association mode, which is, okay, maybe you do want to think about that, but maybe just like think about that in a different environment when you're going for a walk, because you're now have exhausted the limits of the deep focus, thinking about that thing so constricted and so tight that you're just causing yourself to be unhappy. And I also like, I totally can remember like state changes where I'm thinking about something that's gone poorly. And for the first, let's say 20 minutes, I'm thinking about it. And I am actually thinking about new things and new angles. And then after that 20 minutes, the next 40 minutes is just thinking about all the stuff that made me feel bad in the first place. And I'm just revolving. Like I think Oscar Wilde, when he was in prison, he wrote De Profundis, which was a long letter to his lover. Reason he was in prison was because he was gay. And he opens it by saying, for us, suffering is one long moment. Time doesn't progress, it revolves. And this feeling of like time revolving, I think, is a state of mind that I know what Jake means when he says to be cautious of that state of mind. And maybe just to note, like, think about the switching state, when now you're just in the revolving door circumstance.
I think it might be unfortunately useful here to use your lens of all thought is problem solving here, actually.
Oh, fucking victory. Let's go, Ben. Oh, and the podcast right here.
If you consider like introspection, rumination, etc., reflection of any sort as like trying to solve some problem, as vague as it might be, then you might say that rumination is trying to solve the same problem in the same way. And I think maybe that's what I was missing in my first answer. So I think it's probably not sufficient to define rumination as just thinking about the same thing. It's got to be thinking about the same thing in the same way, such that you're not making progress. You're basically just doing the mental equivalent of banging your head against the wall. Because if you've tried to think about something one way and it's leading to pain or leading to you not just solving the problem, whatever that problem is, and then you just keep doing that. You can't dig yourself out of that particular thought pattern. But that's different from considering different angles or trying to solve this particular problem in different ways. And I think, it's helpful to differentiate those two things, because it's very natural to not solve whatever problem you're thinking about immediately, in which case, of course, you're going to keep thinking about the problem. But the healthiest thing to do is to think about it from multiple angles and ask yourself various questions about it and try and get yourself to think about it in different ways, and then perhaps talk to people about it, et cetera, right? So like throwing a lot of mental machinery at the problem to see how you can get around it. Whereas, again, rumination would just be doing the same thing over and over again. So in that sense, if you define it like that, then I agree rumination is always bad. But I just wanted to be careful to say, like, clearly you can't just always be visiting totally new psychological terrain, right? Like that's just totally infeasible. And if we hold ourselves to that standard, it's not going to go well.
And like, if you were to write your thoughts out, would you have written that thought out 20 minutes ago?
Right. Nice. Yeah.
Because if so, perhaps you're doing the revolving door kind of thinking. And I can absolutely catch myself thinking something I thought 20 minutes ago, and that tends to be a good. Going forward, I'm going to be using that as a good indication that I've perhaps, and we can even say perhaps reach the limits of introspection during that session, right? Like it could be that you still want to go back to that thought later. It's just that maybe in that session you've now exhausted the territory.
I actually wonder, your comments about writing make me think that I wonder if this is part of the reason writing is useful, because it makes legible your actual thought patterns. And then you can both recognize it. You can recognize it in yourself later. Like, oh, I'm just doing the same thing. I'm just thinking the same thing. Whereas like when the thought's trapped in your head, it is a bit ephemeral and it can be hard to pin down. Like, is this kind of the exact same thing I'm thinking before? But once you've write it down, you've really made it concrete, and it's easy to spot patterns and unhealthy patterns, especially in your thought.
Yeah, no. So that shit saved my life when I was having my psychotic break, right? Like, I don't know if I told you this dimension of it, but for the listeners who maybe don't know this part of my life story, I was in a psych ward for a month and about a month, and then I was diagnosed with bipolar 1, which is different than bipolar 2. Bipolar 2 is the what people typically think of when they think about bipolar, which is Kanye West, a lifetime of highs and lows. Bipolar 1 is a much more expansive category, which I believe the only diagnostic criteria is that you have some sort of manic episode that puts you in the hospital. So it's a bit more expansive. But so during that episode, there was a couple nights when I literally could not sleep because my mind was going 1,000 miles an hour. And so I would just go to the couch and I would just write out everything that I was thinking with my laptop at 15 degrees open, and my eyes were closed, and I was just touch typing. And
wow.
And occasionally I would move my fingers over a bit two keys to the left, and it'll all be totally illegible for 5 minutes, and then I'd just get back to where it's supposed to be. And then the next morning I could kind of comb through and clean it up a little bit and see. But it felt like a relief valve. Like it felt like if I didn't do that, I was going to explode. And that I needed to just get it out. And probably something like 70% of the thoughts were just delusional fantasies, but about 20-30% of them were actually good insights that lasted the test of time. And one of those that I remember was in one of my manic fits. I just wrote, "The only test for sanity is long form writing plus time," because in the moment I was so sure that I was right, but I was also so sure that you should never be sure that you're right because of ruminating about Popper. And so I was like, okay, if what I'm thinking is true right now, it's still going to be true in a month and in 6 months. And so I'm just going to write that shit down on the page, and I'm going to think about that later. But it very much felt like I was so bottled up with all these things that if I didn't get them out on the page, then I would just explode. And so that's obviously a very extreme circumstance, an extreme example. But I think that there's definitely something about just the releasing nature of writing, even if you don't read it. And even if your fingers are 2 keys shifted such that it's not legible to anyone, but just typing it does do something to you. And so I would highly recommend sleep writing. That's what I called it. Just laptop closed and you're just touch typing. Just whatever you're ruminating about, just touch type it. Doesn't even fucking matter if you can read it. Don't edit. Just touch type it and press enter and touch type it.
Do you do that now at all? Probably not to the same extent or anything, but do you use, if you feel any sort of build up or manic energy, do you just you start writing? Yeah.
So there's manic episodes, which fortunately has only happened to me once. But then there's hypomanic episodes, which, at least in my case, every time I have a hypomanic episode, I write a blog post. And so the blog post is completely correlated with the hypomanic episode. And 100%, essentially, I think all of my blog posts have started in somewhat of that form. Because like the blog post comes about because of being in some sort of debate with some person who I'm, and I'm wanting to express.
Idiot.
Yeah, some idiot. It's one of which is William MacAskill, who we'll be talking about momentarily. But yes, and so it's not as if I can just sit down next Thursday and do that. It's more that when I'm in this kind of hypomanic, very generative state, then I kind of just have to do it because I can't sleep. And so you can essentially enumerate the number of times it's happened to me because every single time a blog post comes out of it. Which is why I'm not good at just writing blog posts on a regular cadence like you are. And then when I do write them, it's just like 10,000 words of bullshit that is coming out somewhere. And so it may as well go out on the internet, but I have very little control over it. So I want to, okay, so there's a couple things. So the therapy episode sparked more conversation about therapy, but I'm actually going to save that for maybe our next episode so we can make this a little bit of a reoccurring theme. Partially because I want to get into the main app, but partially because I don't want to distract from Jake's comments. And so he made a couple other comments that I thought were just worth reading out. So he says, so you also mentioned couples therapy. So I agree that the therapist herself is quite skilled, but I have mixed feelings about the show. While the participants are consenting adults, introducing cameras into the room creates an experimenter interactive effect and even demand effects, which inevitably change the therapeutic dynamic. Many therapists would argue that this compromises authenticity and makes the process less clinically sound, even if the show ultimately helps normalize therapy or sparks useful conversations. I see value in it, but I also find the ethics genuinely debatable. So I just want to say I totally agree with this. Yeah, I had similar questions myself. What Jake said at the end of this paragraph is kind of how I was justifying it to myself. Like, I don't think it's so unethical that you can't watch it, but just the what I learned from watching that show, like what good therapy looks like, was such a valuable experience that even if it's still ultimately distorted and it wouldn't totally match a genuine therapeutic setting, those insights were valuable to me, especially as someone who has never been to therapy myself. So I just want to air Jake's comments because I think that's important extra context for anyone who wants to watch that show themselves.
Yeah, I think I was confused when you first described it. So it's real couples going through real therapy.
Yeah.
I thought it was a fictionalized show where it was
No. So I guess they I read a little bit about the background, and I guess she screened like 1,300 couples, like in the thousands, or maybe in the 1,000, and then found 10 couples that were suitable. So obviously she's filtering for like, are they going to be interesting on camera and all this? But at least the problems that they are there to discuss are genuine, and it's a genuine dynamic between them. Yeah.
Interesting.
And the last comment from Jake I want to read is, you also asked for a bit of fact checking on terminology. So psychiatrists are MDs and psychologists hold PhDs or PsyDs, licensed through professional bodies. But you're absolutely right that therapist or psychotherapist is an unregulated term. Anyone can claim it. That ambiguity has allowed people with limited training or some shadier life coaching backgrounds to present themselves in ways that can be misleading or harmful. Licensed psychologists, regardless of theoretical orientation, are highly trained and much more tightly regulated in how they practice and represent themselves. They typically receive far more training in actual counseling than MD psychiatrists, who often focus primarily on pharmacological interventions. So just a bit of background on those details, which I was sorely lacking last time. But yeah, thank you so much, Jake, for writing in such a beautiful and well-written email. And to all of our other listeners who haven't written in such beautiful and well-written emails, what the hell's wrong with you guys? just follow Jake. Yeah. Anyway, what do you think? Should we get into it, or any last thoughts on this?
No, let's get into it.
No, well, let's go. Welcome back to another episode of Increments. My name is Vaden. I'm a senior research scientist in machine learning. And of course, to my left or right, depending on the mirroring functionality of this platform, we have the one and only Benjamin. I do not want to be here right now, Chug.
Yeah. That's the most accurate middle name you've ever given me. Hyphenated between all those words.
Yeah. And so we're on Discord, we're on Patreon, we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify. Like and subscribe, all that business. But today we're talking about effective altruism. And we're talking about a paper which Ben and I have very different views on. And so perhaps rather than me kick things off, I will pass it over to you. Figured a good place to start before we get into it is maybe just, I don't know, saying a bit about where we're coming from and why we started this paper in the first place, and et cetera, et cetera.
So yeah, I don't know how this first came on our radar. I think it actually came on our radar like much earlier, like 2 years ago, and I think we actually both ran across it, but then never sort of dove into it, or maybe you did at that time and then just kind of put it aside for a bit. But so it's this like big sociological study about EA. It's titled "Effective Altruism and the Strategic Ambiguity of Doing Good" by Molly Gleiberman out of the University of Antwerp. And it was a discussion paper, perhaps in some journal. I don't actually know how sociology works, but some sort of working/discussion paper. And she, I believe she's a sociologist. Is that right?
Anthropologist.
Or anthropologist. Okay. So yeah, I mean, we just have, I think, different reads of how impressive this paper is. I think you view it as a vindication of your views of EA, which is that they're this purely evil organization that has been organized from the top down to funnel money into long-termism and AI research, et cetera, and that this sort of agenda has been there from the beginning. And this is very much the line she takes in this paper. So I just want to maybe state up front, I think it's a very impressive piece of work. You know, I've spent my fair share of time getting mad and being obsessed with EA and combing through the EA forum and other various archival material to find what I wanted. And she has really done that in spades. So, what the document we're looking at today is 60 pages. Roughly half of that is just footnotes and stuff. So, she's really become intimately acquainted in some ways with EA, at least the online version of effective altruism. So, and she's got a lot of very interesting anecdotes, a lot of interesting quotes. She's obviously done her homework for sort of years on this subject. So it's very impressive in that sense. I'm not sold by her main thesis, and I'm not sold even by her premises. I guess my overall view is that a lot of the dynamics that she's pointing to are true, but that they are an unfortunate byproduct of a community that's been beset with a certain set of ideas. And so her interpretation of what's going on, I think, is wrong and is significantly more conspiratorial than is warranted by even the evidence she presents. So I think, it's got that sort of flavor. Like that sounds like, I'm casting sort of gross aspersions, but she's basically saying there's a conspiracy at play here. And I think that's wrong. So I think just a much more parsimonious explanation of what's going wrong. And I agree that lots of things are going wrong. And I'm just going to caution the audience that one can agree that things are wrong and point towards things are wrong, but that's not evidence that there was some agenda being designed from the top down to make things go wrong. And I think that's going to be a big departure between us in this convo. And a much more parsimonious explanation of what's going on is just, it's like a community sort of genuinely torn between different sets of ideas. And one set of those ideas that I think we both agree are bad ideas are, have created unfortunate dynamics that have made members feel weird, that have caused weird rifts in the community, that are affecting their funding in certain ways. And so the dynamic is very real and very bad, but not cultivated from the top down in any sense. So, maybe I'll just stop blathering on at this point and let you come in with your deep state plandemic style stuff here and let you waffle on.
Touche. So if you permit me to do a bit of extended setup from my end, I feel like it's there's a good amount of the table that I want to set before we get into the actual paper. So how did the EA subject come up? So we haven't talked about EA, I think, for 2 or maybe 3 years on the pod. I think the last episode we did on this was with Nick Anyos around the 60s number. And in all of those episodes, I had always basically started by saying that I love EA. I'm a big fan of EA. My critiques are coming from like a perspective of concern for a friend. But a lot has changed over the last 3 years. And my view has changed over the last 3 years, partially due to, or in large part due to Molly's work. Why it was resurfaced, without naming any names in the Discord, I had posted an article from MacAskill on his blog most recently, that I posted with a sneer, let's just say. And then someone in the Discord called me out for being an EA hater. Fair enough. I was inviting such a critique given my let's just say sneering. Listeners know my tone, the tone that I can take. So I took that basic tone. Yeah. And the answer to the challenge, well, Vaden, you are an EA hater, is that, yeah, I am. And I think that EA has done, over its lifespan, 10 years now. I think it was formally started in about 2015. It depends on when you want to date it, but let's just say about 10 years. That they've just done a lot of harm. And so my view is different. However, in the last 6 months or so, I've started to meet some people in Vancouver who are affiliated with the EA movement, who know nothing about the podcast, nothing about my views here. And it's filled with just good, kind, caring people. And so everything I'm about to say, I just want to preface by strongly distinguishing between, let's say, 3 groups. Let's say EA leadership, which is where I'm going to be most critical. Quote, core EA, which is terminology that comes from the paper, and we'll explain that. But then also grassroots EA. So grassroots EA, I would put someone like yourself in that camp. Someone who, maybe not now, but back in the day when you were involved, which is someone who just cares about helping the world, helping the poor, just a good person, and who genuinely believes in the philosophy of EA, which is that we can be much more effective in our giving. So nothing I'm about to say is going to be critical of grassroots EA types, nor that high overarching principle. But I am going to be saying very critical things about the leadership. And last thing I'll say is I recognize this is a very sensitive subject for many people, given the reaction that I got in the Discord. I mean, I was not pulling any punches, and if listeners want to know what I wrote, they can join the Discord, but a lot of what I've wrote will surely come up in this conversation. But I still wasn't expecting the reaction that I got. Like, people were saying they're disappointed in me, that I've totally lost it, that I'm unhinged, that I'm a conspiracy theorist, all these good terms. So all of that could be true. I could be totally wrong. We'll let the listeners decide. But at least to me, that's a signal that I need to be much more careful with who I'm targeting with these critiques, because I'm certainly not targeting the many, many people who've gotten involved in EA and are just working hard trying to make the world better. There's oodles of such people, some of whom are friends in Vancouver now. And nothing I'm about to say is going to be critical of that group, but it will be critical of the leadership. So if I can set a bit more background, I thought one place I wanted to begin was a bit of a different story, actually. I want to talk a little bit about Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa. So I know you will be familiar with this story because you know Hitch's work, but I want to tell a little bit of the story about the Mother Teresa phenomenon for people who aren't familiar with kind of that tale, because I think that there's a lot of lessons we can draw from that and a lot of similarities as well. So, and actually, how familiar are you with the Mother Teresa stuff? Like, do you know the story, like Hitch's angle on it and all this, or is it still?
Yeah, I read his book on our way back in the day.
Yeah, nice. So Hitch's wrote a book called The Missionary Position, which is essentially what I'll just tell a little bit about that book here. So Mother Teresa, she got super famous in, I think, 1969 after a documentary by Malcolm Muggeridge, which kind of put her on the map. So she was known for founding, so she's a Catholic saint, or now she's a saint, but at the time she was a Catholic nun. And she founded the Missionaries of Charity organization to help poor and in particular dying people in Calcutta, India, where she's from. So she got super famous in 1969, and then that got a lot of attention, a lot of international support, a lot of international funding. And over the intervening decades, so I believe she died in the 90s, she expanded the Missionaries of Charity organization to almost 100, or I think Wikipedia or ChatGPT said like 500 different hospices across the world. She was given the Nobel Prize. She was given the Medal of Honor. She met all sorts of famous people. Princess Diana, there's a famous photo of her and Princess Diana. Gorbachev, Reagan, Thatcher, she met everybody. And hospices, so if you go to a hospice in Canada, a hospice is a place that they put people who are not treatable. So if you go to a hospital, you'll get treatment. But if you are terminal, then you'll be moved to hospice care, where you'll be essentially tended for and cared for until you pass. So international acclaim, everyone loved her for all the good charitable work she was doing. But Hitchens, being himself a student of Orwell, because in Orwell's review of Gandhi, he said, and I love this line, that saints, of course, should be presumed guilty until proven innocent. And that line, I think, is part of the reason that Hitchens wanted to examine her work without the veil of religious sanctimony, shall we say. So he suspected that she was a extremist Catholic fundamentalist campaigner who was cloaking her fundamentalism in humanitarianism. So he went to Calcutta. He was shown her hospice, and then nearing the end of her tour, she just said, "And look at all the good work that we're doing to fight contraception and abortion in Calcutta." And so her main religious impulse, her main reason for doing all of this was because she was adamant pro-lifer. Her Nobel Prize speech, you can read it online, a full half of it is dedicated towards talking about how abortion and contraception is the world's greatest evil. So one of the things that Hitch likes to say is that she wasn't, in fact, a friend of the poor. She was a friend of poverty, because the single most effective way to address poverty is female emancipation and female control over their reproductive cycle. But Mother Teresa was adamantly and steadfastly against that for her entire life, and used humanitarianism as a means of putting forth her fundamentalist agenda. It's not just that, though. So if you can read all this criticism of her on Wikipedia and online. But so in her hospices, it wasn't what I said earlier, which is that it's only for people who are terminal. There were all sorts of people who could have had adequate medical treatment. I think one person just had a treatable kidney diagnosis, but instead of giving them access to modern medicine or modern treatment, she just gave them some bread and let them die. They reused needles. They didn't give painkillers to anybody. And this is as she was receiving millions and millions of dollars that could have been used to actually treat the people that she was helping, or said she was helping. But instead, she just used that money to build more hospices across the world. Not only that, she also preached that suffering was a good thing, that suffering brought you closer to God. And then when she fell ill, she was given the best treatment in Scandinavian countries. There's stories of kids being sold against their will to wealthy people from the hospices, because she was not running an orphanage where she was running a hospice, but yet still selling kids to people. This is unbelievably unethical.
Fuck, I forgot that detail. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And she was taking money from despots, and like the Duvalier family in Haiti. She, after the Bhopal chemical disaster in India, she flew out in order to bless the company that caused the disaster. She wrote letters in support of a guy named Charles Keating, who before Sam Bankman-Fried and before Bernie Madoff was the biggest financial scam in history. She wrote letters of support because presumably he gave some money to her hospices. And so all of this is to say that just because there's humanitarian veneer over her actions, and just because she surely thought that she was acting with the best of intentions and she was just following her belief system. That does not mean we cannot criticize her, and that does not mean that we can't talk about her as a bad person doing wicked things, even though she felt like she was doing the right thing. So hopefully the analogies here will be clear to our listeners. But I think basically a similar thing is happening in the effective altruism world. I think that swap out Catholicism for X-risk and AI doomerism, like I might just use the phrase Bostromism to refer to all of this, but swap out that and we have a very analogous situation. So just because there are humanitarian acts that have come out of movement dedicated to charity does not mean that we necessarily should assume that the people at the top are being honest and straight shooting. So we're going to go into Gleiberman's paper, but at the highest level, what I think is actually happening, or actually did happen, and will provide evidence for this, is that there was a small cohort of graduate students very close to Nick Bostrom. So Nick Bostrom is the guy who invented the concept of X risk. You can read a paper of his in 2002 that had all the ingredients for long-termism. The large numbers multiplied by small probabilities, the claiming. So Bostrom actually talks about the Bhopal disaster, and he says that and World War I and World War II and AIDS and polio, they're mere just drops in the ocean when compared to the vast numbers of future life. We didn't have the language for long-termism back then, but all of the necessary ingredients were in his work in 2002. Then he wrote the book Superintelligence, crystallizing that his main fear was AI. And then you had graduate students like Nick Bostrom, like William MacAskill, like Nick Beckstead, who spun out of this lab. And so where I'm being accused of conspiracy thinking, and we'll just let the listeners decide this for themselves.
Tongue-in-cheek on my part, obviously.
Of course. Yeah. But less tongue-in-cheek, less tongue-in-cheek in the Discord. I think people genuinely think I'm a conspiracy theorist in the Discord. I think that essentially what happened was a bunch of charity organizations opened up under the guise of just providing broad humanitarianism for the entire world. But instead, it was, like with Teresa, about putting forth a fundamentalist agenda. And this agenda is that this small group of researchers know that which the whole world doesn't know, which is that AI is going to kill everybody in a couple decades. And yet they found that whenever they tried to convince people of this, everyone thought they were nuts. And so they thought that the best way to save the world was to open up rationality institutes, the guys of Yudkowski. So we'll talk about rationality, but really the rationality is just a way to funnel people in order to get them to work on X risk. We'll open up charities in the name of effective altruism. We'll open up career counseling in the form of giving what we can. And we'll open up research institutes in the form of leverage research and the Future of Humanity Institute, all with one direction in mind. And that direction is X risk, X risk, X risk. And that's what I think happened. And so now I have to provide evidence for this. But this is what the main thrust of the paper is about. And there are historical precedents for this kind of thing. It's not an anomaly. This happens when you believe that you have God's truth on your side or Bostrom's truth on your side. And all of this can happen with good intentions, but yet we can still say, just like we would say of the politician who accepts a bag of cash, that they're a corrupt politician. Even if they accepted that bag of cash for the best of intentions, we would still say that they're corrupt. I think we can still say that there is a lot of duplicitous, shady shit happening under the guise of apparent humanitarianism. And that's the broad thesis of this work and also where I'm coming from.
Nice. Should we dive into it?
Hell yeah. So maybe one place to start is just to read her abstract. So I think it's important that people get a sense of her, like she is coming at this with an angle. So she's not being neutral here. So she says, this paper presents some initial empirical findings from a larger forthcoming study about effective altruism. The purpose of presenting these findings, disarticulated from the main study, is to address a common misunderstanding in the public and academic consciousness about EA, recently pushed to the fore with the publication of EA movement co-founder William MacAskill's latest book, What We Owe the Future. So most people, and I'll just a comment here, most people, including many of the people who pushed back on me in the Discord, and many of the people I think in broader culture, most people in the general public, media, and academia believe EA's focuses on reducing global poverty through effective giving, and are struggling to understand EA's seeming sudden embrace of long-termism, futurism, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and X-risk reduction. However, this agenda has been present in EA from its inception, where it was hidden in plain sight. From the very beginning, EA discourse operated on two levels, one for the general public and one for general public and new recruits, which is focused on global poverty, and one for the core EA community, as articulated by Nick Bostrom, Eliezer Yudkowski, and others, centered on AI safety and X-risk, which we now call long-termism. This article's aim is narrowly focused on presenting rich qualitative data to make legible the distinction between public-facing EA and core EA. So maybe a good place to begin is just what she means by public-facing EA and core EA.
Actually, no, I want to just start by questioning some of her premises here, which she never does never cites any evidence for. And I think that's going to be one of my main criticisms that I just want to get on the table immediately. So underlying her main claim here is that EA publicly presents itself as just focusing on global poverty. So like the Give Well style, Peter Singer style, global poverty reduction, send money to people in need, or buy them malarial bed nets or something. And that EA just like presented this public image solely while sort of secretly, covertly working on this long-termist agenda until it was ready to be, until something triggered them to write books about it, which is also sort of not explained, but that's okay. So it's worth asking yourself, like, okay, this is what she's building her argument on. Like, is this true? Can we like find evidence to this effect or against this? It seems pretty clearly not true. So you can just do very basic things like look at the Wikipedia page for effective altruism, which went up in like 2013. Just use the Wayback Machine and go back to 2013, 2014, 2015 in those early years. Do the same thing on the Center for Effective Altruism website to see like how they branded themselves. Do the same thing on the EA forum to see what sort of things were being discussed. Maybe you don't call that public EA. I don't know. You can also do things like, just look at the early. So the 80,000 Hours podcast is famously the podcast that is associated with effective altruism. You can look at that. So they got started in 2016, I believe. So you can just look at like what are their earliest episodes, and clearly that podcast is meant as a recruitment tool in some way, or at least a way to like present their ideas to the broader world because they think they have good ideas and they want to spread them. So that's sort of as public facing as you get. And then you can just ask like, okay, were they just talking about global poverty? Like, was this claim true? And the claim is just like demonstrably not true. So, the earliest EA pages discuss existential risk as a main cause area right away. CEA, which always releases their funding since they've done that from the beginning. Like, where are we getting funding? Who are we giving funding to? They discuss funding for AI and global catastrophic risks, which is what they used to call X-risk. Way back in 2016. So like right after CEA got booted up. The first several episodes of the 80,000 Hours podcast was about AI. And so the first and third 80,000 Hours podcast in 2017 was about AI. The sixth and 10th, also in 2017, which was Toby Ord, who wrote The Precipice in 2020, which we've discussed at length, and Nick Beckstead, who you referenced, who wrote his PhD thesis at Oxford on long-termism, which I think that like created the word long-termism and whatnot. He was, the 10th episode. Again, this is all like their early days. So I think, a much more accurate view of this community is certainly global poverty was like a big part of what they discussed. And a big part of like where the funding was going. So another criticism I have is she never looks at like the funding breakdowns of EA, like where the money's going, etc. And that's all publicly available information. You can get that pretty easily. But they were always this community of nerds who were interested in like really weird ways to potentially help the world. So they were always talking about long-termism. They were talking about pandemic preparedness, which was weird at that time. Like now it sounds very obvious, but COVID hadn't happened yet. And people were making fun of them for that stuff. They were talking about super forecasting, this prediction market stuff. They were talking about futurism. And so, and they're talking about AI. They're talking about AI safety. And this is why a lot of people think they've been vindicated. Of course, we disagree to a large extent, but a lot of people in the general public think they've been vindicated on the AI stuff because they view AI as like this super powerful technology that EA was already sort of pouring resources into. Anyway, my main point here is that they were not hiding this. So like she just claims in the paper that journalists and the general public were, just convinced that they were only focused on global poverty reduction. I think that's just obviously not true with any sort of surface level digging. Okay, the second issue I want to bring up is that she claims that so while this focus on global poverty reduction was going on in the public face, the core of EA, the leadership, was secretly focused on what she's calling the transhumanist agenda, and that I think you want to call Bostromism. Sure, that's fine. I think that is sort of it's a bit nonsensical, or it's bordering on the nonsensical. Transhumanism is, one, it doesn't account for the fact that people like Yudkowski and Bostrom in the early days were extremely pro AI. So like when Yudkowski first got into AI, and I believe when he first founded Miri, it was like, we're going to figure out how to build super intelligence to radically change the world for the better. And they were excited about the prospects of AI. And then as they started thinking about how to do this, they became scared for various reasons. But transhumanism is like a pro-technology ideology, right? Transhumanists traditionally believe in using technology to overcome aging, disease, hardship of all sorts, basically to make our lives as abundant and prosperous as possible, making us live forever, things like that, sending us to the stars. EAs right now are totally anti-AI. They want to legislate it. They want to stop it. This pause AI movement that Liron is associated with that comes straight out of EA AI safety concerns. You have Yudkowski writing letters to Time saying, bomb. Okay, he didn't really say bomb the data centers, but that's now what people quote from that. And so I think she presents this image where they just like, we're doing one thing in public, secretly doing another thing behind closed doors. I think it's just not at all true that they weren't talking about this other agenda in public. And furthermore, this other covert agenda sort of starts to fall apart when you ask, like, how did this all relate? Like, transhumanism is not the same as AI safety. And then like, how do weird things that are gaining a lot of momentum now relate to this? How does like the shrimp welfare random stuff relate to this, which also has a lot of funding, which I think is a bad idea and pretty absurd. But I wouldn't say, like, are we just saying, well, because that was a bad idea, that's also related to this covert operation, and they were secretly wanting to send money to shrimp since 2010 when they founded these organizations? Like, I think that's pretty clearly absurd. And so I think she just presents right off the bat this false face of the whole situation, which makes it sort of it makes it easy to think that there's just been this sort of radical transformation from day one to day two of what the organization stands for, what's been going on. But I think when you stand back and just analyze what's happening and the discourse in the community, I think what's really going on is that certainly these ideas were present from the beginning. So that's not something I want to argue or think is false. So definitely Bostrom wrote a lot of these early papers. He was in conversation with Ord and MacAskill, and they all knew each other. They all knew Yudkowski. They were all aware of this kind of language. They were doing expected utility stuff, as was every other economist and philosopher on the planet. And I think these ideas just started to gain sway over Ord and MacAskill. As I think they started these EA orgs, and it was always with the express purpose of like, how do we figure out how to do the most good? Okay. And then these sort of ideas just started to gain sway. And I think you can recognize that those ideas are bad ideas and that they've led to unfortunate outcomes without claiming that like they had this agenda from the beginning. Like from 2010, they founded these orgs and they were like, well, by 2025, we're going to have our funding roughly split between AI safety and GiveWell. Like, it seems like a weird agenda to have. And furthermore, if that was their agenda, they did a very bad job of it, because until about 2023, the amount of funding for GiveWell and global health, not to mention it, animal welfare, if you put animal welfare in that bucket, totally swamped the funding for long-termism and AI safety and whatnot. And so that has changed recently, like 24, 25 saw obviously much more funding going into AI safety. And again, we can argue about whether that's a good or bad thing, but you know, it's you have to go, they did a bad job with sending all this money towards long-termism if it took them 10 years of sending many millions of dollars to kids in Africa, if their eventual goal was to like fund AI safety, which I guess it was their eventual goal on your account.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So I don't think anything you said contradicts anything that Molly has said. So she says it's hidden in plain sight, meaning all of the stuff that you talk about is what she means by the plain sight aspect of this phenomenon.
Well, no. But she says most people in the general public, media, and academia believe EA focuses on reducing global poverty. I just don't think that's true. I think anyone who's looked into EA, even just Googled EA and looked at the Wikipedia, that's why I quoted the Wikipedia page in their main website. It like clearly lists the kinds of things they're interested in. So you'd have to be a moronic journalist to think that they'd only were doing global poverty.
Or you'd have to be Sam Harris, right? So whenever Sam Harris talks about EA, he talks about it at the high level of the principle of being more effective with your altruism, right? I don't think Sam Harris is a moronic doofus or moronic journalist.
No, but he also doesn't think they only do global poverty. He was influenced on their takes on AI. He gave a TED talk on AI safety in 2016, directly attributed to Ord and MacAskill, who convinced him on those points. Why do you think he keeps having them on the podcast?
At no point when he defends EA does he say EA is so great because of their focus on X risk. He always, and like you just listeners can listen to like 3 episodes back, he had a big conversation about EA. And this is the main thing that Gleiberman's talking about in the subtitle of her paper, which is the strategic ambiguity of doing good. So there is enough stuff and enough terminology and enough things to cite that you can always switch between these two notions. I think I just need to give a couple quotes and examples because I think this is worthwhile to justify this idea that they consciously switch between talking about EA in the general sense of we just need to be more effective with our giving, and then they switch to what we actually know exactly what the most effective thing to do is, and that's long-termism. And one such example is in section 2.3. So even as Beckstead was busy writing about X risk and long-term future in his own work right during his PhD thesis, in the media, he presented himself as focusing on ending global poverty by donating to charities serving the distant poor. Like long-termism and X risk are incompatible with global poverty and focusing on the poor. And if I was writing a thesis about how the most important thing is to not focus on the poor and focus on the future, and then I was to go on MSNBC in 2010 and talk about how I'm building an organization that is focused on ending global poverty and focusing on the here and now, this is dishonest. This is only one example as well. Toby Ord talks about how Nick Bostrom was the single biggest impact thinker in his entire life. And yet he and Nick Beckstead founded Effective Altruism. So it's not as if they just got caught up in these ideas and were convinced years later. They started with these ideas, and that was under that framework that they launched the Center of Effective Altruism in the first place. And so let's just focus just on the Nick Beckstead thing for a second. He's writing a thesis about long-termism and why we shouldn't focus on the poor. And then he goes on TV and he talks about how we should focus on the poor. How do you not take this as evidence of duplicitousness or dishonesty? Because that to me is like just one of many screaming examples that she gives. We can also talk about like the 50 quotes from all of these founding members, which we'll get into momentarily. And we can talk about how this was the explicit strategy of Elliot Yudkowski as described by Robin Hanson on his podcast with Robert Wright. And so we'll link to this in the show notes. I'll even timestamp it. where Hansen, who was involved in the very beginning, said like, power to Yud. He knew that he wanted to convince people of X risk, and the only way to sell that to the public was by talking about rationality. So this strategy is just it's a known strategy that he did. And if we're going to start splitting hairs and defining the differences between EA and rationalism, the rationalist community, as if they are completely disjoint organizations, I would just focus on the fact that everyone's talking to each other and everyone's citing each other. And you can read a book talking about how most people learned about EA through the rationalist community. And these are not porous borders. Like these are not, these are porous borders. So let me just return to you. Like, how do you interpret the Nick Beckstead thing without thinking that, like Mother Teresa, she knew that selling abortion is a bad thing, ain't gonna sell very well. So instead she focuses on telling the world that she's curing the poor. This is also open in plain sight with Mother Teresa, because she said this fucking thing on her Nobel Prize speech. And you could say that it was her goal from the very beginning, but yet this is how they sell their agenda to the public, because they know that their main agenda isn't going to be palatable. And so they have to cover it with humanitarianism. Last thing I'll say is we just go to a quote from Yudkowski further on in the paper. So this is Yudkowski. So as I've said repeatedly, X risk cannot be the public face of EA. Open philanthropy can't be the public face of EA. Animal altruism can't be the face of EA. Only sending money to Africa is immediately comprehensible as good, and only an immediately comprehensible good can make up for the terrible PR of maximizing or cause neutrality. Putting AI in there is just shooting yourself in the foot. So this is what Yudkowski is saying to EA founders about EA, and this is the strategy that I'm commenting on. Is saying one thing when you go on MSNBC and saying another thing when you are in your private seminars. And how do you not think that this is shady?
So I agree that some of it is shady, for sure. So I want to draw a distinction between noticing like a dynamic in your community and noticing something about your own thoughts, and then being like, okay, there's sort of a happy coincidence here where we've worked to build up a bunch of social capital to build trust in the public and have them think about global poverty.
So this quote was the year that the Center for Effective Altruism was founded. So when Yudkowski said that, it wasn't 5 years after there's been social capital built. It was when CEA was founded. But yeah,
right. But importantly, that's not by any of the CEA founders that gave that quote.
Well, okay. So is this going to really be an important distinction to you? Because like,
well, this is.
So I just want to group this whole thing into one blob of, let's just say, EA and rationalist space. Like if you were going to say, well, the rationalists are doing this crazy thing, but EAs aren't, then we have a lot of difficulties having to explain the fact that like open philanthropy gives money to both, that they're both influenced by Bostrom, that people who work at one also work at the other, that you can see everyone, like it's all interwoven. So I just want to put that on the table.
Sure, but I mean, all I'm saying is like the spokesman that you're criticizing for EA is like Ord MacAskill, like the people who founded these organizations. A separate question is whose ideas were they influenced by, and who are they talking to? But the people who were like in charge of the EA organizations doing the public facing EA stuff was not Yudkowski. Is the point I was making there.
The same organization funds both, which is Moskowitz's organization. So if you just look at open philanthropy.
Well, they're part of the funding body. I mean, there's a lot of different funders. There's a lot of grant making organizations in EA. Like it's not
okay. Well, let's not get stuck here. We'll let the listener decide if you think this is a fair separation. Like it's not like we're talking about EA and Doctors Without Borders. Like those are completely separate organizations.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to like my answer about the Beckstead stuff, but I think it's going to get to like, that's why I don't want to like, that's why I think this conversation is just not going to be fruitful, because there's going to be no hard evidence either way. And we're kind of left with the position we're going to start with, unless something is like strong enough evidence to totally overturn your prior, for lack of a better word. So I guess the best we can do is have a conversation and then hopefully that helps the listener see the truth a little bit more clearly.
I agree.
To my eye, Beckstead's comment and then what he's saying in public, like both are true. So, remember that. So his long-termism stuff was an academic thesis. So you often, and especially in philosophy, you often take controversial theses and run with them, or take specific ideas and run with them and write about it. I have no doubt that he was at least semi-persuaded by the stuff he was writing, hence his appearances, public-facing appearances on the EA podcast and writing about it in public on blogs and everything. But I know for a fact that at least when I was sort of closest to these circles, not that I ever talked to these particular people, but when I was at Oxford in those sort of student groups, there was this constant discussion about like people were emotionally attached to the global poverty stuff and thought it was important to give to that. And I remember Hillary Greaves even giving a talk where she said, I argue intellectually for long-termism, but 50% of my donations still go to GiveWell because I'm just unsure. I'm unsure about it. And I'm a bit uncomfortable with the long-termism stuff. So I think it's very possible to be advancing intellectual arguments for something while also setting up organizations and donating to GiveWell, etc. I don't view this necessarily as evidence of nefarious intentions and trying to dupe the public. And I guess, what would be evidence of that for me, just to be clear, and I would be curious about evidence that would change your mind, because there just seems to be this sort of web of unfalsifiable stuff, which worries me a bit, would be like if someone had asked him, if he was on like the radio, say, he was on BBC talking about global poverty reduction, and then they asked like, oh, we found your thesis and you talk about AI or you talk about long-termism or whatever, and he was like, and he said, oh, that's not actually serious, and like I'm not spending any more time to talk about that. That was just an academic interest, and I don't really believe in that. Like if he had lied about it in that sense, I'd be worried. But anyway, to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, I think there is something bad here.
Do you think something's shady?
There is something shady, especially I think in the years like 2017 to 2019, where EA has like developed long-termism clearly is an idea that people are considering. I think they probably could have been slightly more upfront. How that happens exactly is hard, because what determines how EA is talked about in public isn't only spokesman from EA. It's also just like the culture discussing EA and the fact that they had set up these organizations that do global poverty reduction. And so that itself is going to drive conversation. But sure, they could have been more upfront that there is this sort of uncomfortable dynamic where intellectually they're being slowly swayed towards these arguments for long-termism and AI. But EA was sort of founded doing a lot of global poverty type work. So I'll give you that. So there's surely was some shady stuff going on. And the stuff that really worries me and is kind of heartbreaking are the quotes from members who say like, oh, like I became interested in it because of global poverty, but they join the student groups and the student groups are focused on long-termism, and then these sort of new members of EA sort of feel confused or like a little let down or a little gaslit maybe. And so like, I think those dynamics were at play and like were a little sad. And in some sense it was part of those dynamics that sort of ejected me from EA, because I was slowly persuaded by your arguments against long-termism, like while being surrounded by pro-long-termism. Anyway, so I'm sure that was totally unsatisfying, but I don't view this as like super nefarious. I just view this as like people wrestling up with ideas. And then if you're asked about global poverty intervention on the news, you're going to talk about the organizations you set up for global poverty intervention. Like again, maybe just to ask you like the point blank question, like, so what do you think? So they founded all these organizations like CEA, 2015 or something, but there were other, I think given what we can is 2012 or something. So, things kicked off in sort of the early 2010s was when some these organizations popping up. Like, do you think they had an explicit purpose at that point to fund what eventually? Like, and what did they want the funding landscape to look like? Like, what did you think they wanted to happen by 2025?
I think that they wanted to convince the world that AI is going to kill everybody and get a lot more funding to work to prevent it. So let's talk about nefariousness for a sec. Here's the extent of what I think their nefarious thoughts were. Their thoughts are, okay, we are very sure that the world is going to end and that we're all pooped. But we also recognize that this message doesn't sell very well and that it takes a significant amount of effort to convince people of this. So the best way to convince people is to set up a public face that will draw in a large audience, out of which we can funnel some of that money towards our core research interest. That's as nefarious as I think it gets, but also needs to be. I think that they just need to have this recognition that they're all certain of the truth, that they were all going to die because of AI unless we prevent AI. And so they had this mission, this missionaries of charity, to save the world. I genuinely think they want to save the world. And the only way to do that was to set up orgs such that they could speak ambiguously about doing good and maximizing your effectiveness as a means of getting people to the bottom of the funnel, which is to focus exclusively on X risk. That's what I think they were interested in doing.
So X risk in general or AI? Like where does like moon colonization and like all this stuff come into it? If I just say Bostromism to not you like long-term X risk, Bostromism, AI safety to me, at least in this conversation, are all identical. It's all the same Bayesian epistemology at the bottom, which is that there's a tiny, tiny, tiny probability that what we're saying is true. But if it's true, then there's a billion, trillion, infinity number of people who will get hurt from that. And then your question is where do the other like interests come from, like the shrimp welfare stuff, for instance, right? That was your question, or no? Yeah, like I was just wondering how you account for like increasing funding going towards that if their goal was to funnel everything towards AI safety.
So how much funding does AI safety get now compared to how much it got 15 years ago? It gets way more now. So they're trying to funnel a percentage of it. But if the total is growing, then they're getting more money towards AI.
I mean, another way to explain that is most people are concerned about AI now. Your arguments notwithstanding, right? Like AI safety funding has exploded. Like my point is, you don't need a conspiracy to. Sorry, I'm using.
So
when
what
I say conspiracy,
so far, is that a conspiracy? Like all I've said so far is
it is a conspiracy in the sense. It's just that we have an extremely negative connotation towards the term conspiracy theory, but it is a conspiracy. You're thinking there's people who are setting up an organization to do something in like 10 or 15 years that they're not, and that's not the express purpose of the organization. Like it is a conspiracy, right?
Well, so
that doesn't mean it's wrong. That just means like I don't know what else to call it. Like a cabal.
Ulterior motives. The ulterior motives. And a mission a mission to save the world. That's all I need. And that's all I think is happening. Okay, so let's just quickly do a little bit about conspiracy theories for a second. So what's my mental checklist for conspiracy theories? A conspiracy theory like the moon landing or that 9/11 was an inside job. How do I rule that out as prima facie false? Well, one, if the conspiracy involves a huge number of people who would have to keep everything perfectly silent and be working absolutely perfectly in cahoots with one another, that's extremely unlikely. So that would be required for 9/11. That would be required for the moon landing. So too, with the idea that, and no information has been leaked to the public about 9/11 or the moon landing, that also makes it seem less plausible. Well, what do we have here? We have everything is already public, so there's no hidden information, and it doesn't require a huge number of people all working silently. It requires like maybe a ring of 7 or 8 grad students, all of whom cite their central sources, and nothing is required to involve hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people all working in cahoots. It's just the group dynamics kick in, and if you get enough people going to Calcutta because they want to help the poor, and enough people when they arrive are talking about how the best way to help the poor is to prevent condoms from being distributed across all of India, then some of those people are going to be convinced. Some of those people are going to be convinced and then start talking about it themselves. And that's all that I think is going on here. It's just a small group of people who I can name and who have everything in public, in writing, saying that this is what they actually are doing, and then they did it. So let me just get some quotes here for the latter. Scott Alexander, so is he an EA? Well, he's definitely part of the movement. I don't know how you want to slice and dice this, but so what does Scott Alexander say? Existential risk isn't the most useful public face for effective altruism. Everyone, including Eliezer Yudkowski, agrees about that. Another from Scott Alexander. Several people have recently argued that the effective altruist movement should distance itself from AI risk and other far future causes, lest it make them seem weird and turn off potential, my emphasis, recruits. Even proponents of AI risk charities like myself agree we should be kind of quiet about it in public-facing spaces. Kind of quiet about it. So now this is where everyone's freaking conspiracy radar bings, because there's a little bit of having to read through the lines here, right? This is what I think people are getting upset with me for doing, because we only have like some quotes and some phrases like, oh, we should be a little bit quiet about it. And so now what I'm doing based on Molly's work is trying to connect some of the dots. And I said this either in Discord or maybe in our Patreon chat. I want the listener not to put on their tinfoil hat and switch into everything is a fucking conspiracy and everyone's out to get us mode. But I want them to switch into being a juror during a white collar crime trial where you only have some bank statements and a few scattered emails. And with this information, you have to try to piece together what's happening behind the scenes. And so the distinction between a conspiracy lens and a white collar crime lens is that, well, the similarity is that both of them are having to squint between the lines and connect dots. So it's the dot connecting, which I think is triggering people with regards to the conspiracy stuff. But the difference between these two is that if you're dealing with like white collar crime, you're not having to assume like tens of thousands of government operatives are all working in perfect secrecy and in perfect silence and flawlessly without mistakes to orchestrate a huge cover-up. But you still have to do the dot connecting thing. And so, yes, I am saying we have to do some dot connecting because this is the only evidence that we have. And so I can give more quotes, but maybe I'll pause there. But just for the listeners, like maybe like please at least skim through this yourself, listener, because there's maybe 20 or 30 quotes of a similar flavor to the ones that I've read out from all sorts of high-ranking members talking about how, like, wink, wink. Oh, here's one. I used to work for an organization at EA, and I'm still quite active in the community. I've heard people say things like, sure, we say effective altruism is about global poverty, but wink, nod. That's just what we do to get people in the door so they can convert me to helping them with AI, animal suffering, insert weird cause here. This disturbs me. So there's oodles of quotes like this. And maybe the last thing I'll say is that, like, if Georgia has a vaccine and I say, hey, Georgia, we got to go to our appointment today. That's strategic ambiguity, right? That's knowing that I want her to do this, but I'm not going to say it in that language because she's not going to like that. So I'm going to say it in some kind of general, vague language. And all that I need to get off the ground here is that the founders occasionally sometimes think like parents in the sense that they think they know what's best for other people. And they're going to damn well get that done, but they're going to do it by using language in kind of a careful, subtle way. So that's all we need to see kind of what's going on here. We don't need to go conspiracy, but we do need to connect the dots. We do need to recognize that people use language strategically. And you can do this for good reasons, and you can do this for nefarious reasons. And EA leadership is doing this for what they think are good reasons, but it is freaking nefarious when it creates the amount of harm to well-intentioned grassroots individuals who just want to help people. And then they go in and then they're being brainwashed by all this shit.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're waffling back and forth between two different theses. And I think one is probably right and the other one is probably wrong. The first thesis is, again, that there's this group of people in 2010 communicating, and they're going to set up all these organizations for animal welfare and global poverty, trick the public by 2025. 30% of the funding or whatever something is going to be going towards AI safety. I think that thesis is probably wrong. What I think is correct is that these ideas were there from the beginning. They started to gain traction among the leaders of EA, especially MacAskill and Ord, especially as they started to see AI actually become much more relevant. And then I think they noticed some of the dynamics that you're pointing out. And so I think from there, they probably did realize, like, okay, a lot of people are joining EA. And in fact, there's a quote that Molly gives from MacAskill along this very point. Like, a lot of people join EA because of global poverty and animal welfare. Then they spend time more involved with the EA community, and they become persuaded by the long-termism arguments or for AI or whatever. And then they become persuaded of those causes. And so I think that's the precise dynamic that Alexander was noticing when he wrote those posts. And I agree that the ethical thing to do from there is not to sort of just shut up about it, but to be like perhaps more clear. I'm not sure exactly how. I think it's like the broader cultural view of a movement is not some top-down directed phenomenon. It's also bottom up from just random blog posts and media and stuff about it. But I agree they could have somehow been more upfront that they were moving in this long-termism direction earlier. They were extremely upfront as soon as like 2019 hit, because that's when they started writing papers about long-termism. And Toby Ord wrote The Precipice in 2020. So from maybe 2017 to 2019, I think we can fault them for being shady, basically, as you said. Why I think your first thesis is wrong, that they were planning this from the beginning, is one, I think you can add, you don't just look at the evidence. You can also ask, if this were true, what would we expect to see? And then I think some things start to look weird on that view. So like, why would they have done all this stuff in public? Like arguing about it in public and on podcasts and on forums is much more compatible with the view that this is like them actually just figuring out what their views were in real time and not having a secret plan from the beginning. Then you also have to ask about the funding situation now. Like, why is all this weird stuff about, again, shrimp welfare and, space colonization and demox or demo or whatever you said.
Demodex welfare.
Yeah, exactly. If their focus was supposed to be AI safety, like they wouldn't be very happy about this either. So this would be, I guess, just a failure of their persuasive capabilities or something.
Yeah, well, so I think the animal welfare partially comes because of the Peter Singer influence. So Peter Singer was just part of the kind of the zeitgeist, and Singer has distanced himself now from this. But if you're a moral movement of philosophers, having the clout of Peter Singer is going to be really helpful. And maybe Singer got into it genuinely. But I think a lot of the animal welfare stuff comes from that influence. And I'm not criticizing any of that.
No, but I'm saying you're saying that's part of the public facing stuff, because she doesn't actually make that clear or discuss that really.
Well, so I think that's
she just talks about global poverty.
So insert weird cause here. So if by animal suffering you mean like factory farming, I don't think that's weird. I think that's totally legit. If by animal suffering you mean like shrimp sentience and worrying about like Demodox, Demodox welfare, which are these tiny little skin mites that someone wrote like a 50,000 page blog post about why there's trillions of them on your body. That's the weird stuff, but that's theirs because they just use the same formula, the small probability multiplied by log large number equation to pedal for that. So from your accounting, MacAskill and Ord et al. Kind of just like got caught up in it at some point in their lives, and then they just became convinced kind of organically rather than it being a strategic move at the beginning. Sorry?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I agree. I just think that they got caught up in it and persuaded before they started the movement rather than after. So you see this because...
Which is the big difference. I guess, one, do you agree that that's a big difference?
Yes, I think it's a big difference. But I think part of the reason you're distinguishing between these two theses is that in the latter thesis, they are essentially a victim of the movement, whereas in the first thesis, they are the cause of the movement, right? So in the latter thesis, you're saying like, they got caught up in it too. Like, everyone got caught up in it. They got caught up in it too.
No, because I wouldn't say I've spent a long time criticizing long-termism, so I wouldn't paint them as victims. Like, they were obviously leading the charge in some sense on the intellectual, like they got the main ideas from Bostrom, sure, but they were clearly developing also the ideas on their own and like further investigating them and writing papers and books about them. So I wouldn't call them victims.
Okay, well, so I guess part of the reason I interpret it that way is that if you're talking about it as like a bottom-up thing, then it strips them of any agency or blame, because it's not as if the leaders of the movement have any influence over the direction of the movement.
I literally said there was some shady stuff, even if the second thesis is true, right? I literally said like they could have been more upfront from roughly like 2017 to 2019 about the emphasis of long-termism. But I think it's a much less severe moral failing than if they had literally set up these organizations, sent money to GiveWell, set up Giving What We Can, CEA, discussed global poverty, funded people to think about global poverty. If they did all that with the, again, slightly incoherent view of just having a bunch of money go towards AI safety in like 15 years, that's obviously like that's bordering on evil.
So well before the Center for Effective Altruism was invented, there was a forum called felicia, Felicifa, and it was in this forum that all of these organizations were born. So let me just read. So there's a commenter on the forum called Utility Monster, which, ignore the silly moniker, he's like a founding member, and he says that talk about lives saved with their public face, let hardcore members hear about X risk, and then in the future, if some excellent X risk opportunities arise, direct resources to X risk. This was in 2011, before these orgs got going. MacAskill was a frequent contributor to these orgs. Everyone was already talking about this. This was explicit. This is said and written, and you can just click on the citations they're saying this is the right thing to do.
Do we know who that was?
Below is an excerpt from a 2011 discussion on this forum between an influential Giving What We Can leader and CEA affiliate writing pseudonymously as Utility Monster, and a high school student who would go on to hold influential positions in EA organizations and for EA funders. Their name is redacted here because they were a minor at the time. They're talking about 80,000 hours, still called high impact careers. Utility Monster. Giving What We Can is explicitly poverty focused, but high impact careers is not. In fact, hardcore members of Giving What We Can are heavily interested in X risk, and I estimate that 10 to 15% of general membership is as well. I take them seriously as a group for promoting utilitarianism in general. Utility Monster is a Giving What We Can leader, high school student. But high impact careers always seems to talk about things in terms of lives saved, i.e. I've never heard them mentioning other things to donate to. Utility Monster. That's exactly the right thing for high impact careers to do. Talk about lives saved with their public face, let hardcore members hear about X risk, and then in the future, if some excellent X risk opportunity arises, direct them to X risk. I've spoke to people who have gone through the Giving What We Can mill, and they've reached out to me for career advice, and they're all torn asunder because they're completely confused. It's because there's an agenda here. This was before the organization was founded, or CEA was founded, and it's all in writing. I just you asked me what would change my mind. Well, this changed my mind into thinking that there's something more nefarious going on because of all the quotes. Without the quotes, I wouldn't have thought that there was anything nefarious going on. And I started in your view, which is just bottom up thing. They all got kind of wrapped up in it, and yeah, that's weird and shitty, but no one's really to blame, except for all the quotes saying that this is what you should be doing. And this quotes predated the founding of these organizations. And I think I should just maybe mention, because I know you know this, but we're not just talking about like being shady or having ulterior motives. We're talking about Elon Musk and the decimation of USAID. So like a year before I'm sorry, but this is a connection which needs to be mentioned. A year before he killed USAID, he tweeted affirmatively about long-termism, about William MacAskill's book. He said, this was a close match to my philosophy, the closest match to my philosophy. Someone commented underneath, quoting Bostrom, talking about every second that you don't colonize Mars, there's like 1 billion trillion lives lost, to which Musk responded, well, those numbers might be a little bit high, but the general point remains. And And then a year and a half later, he just completely gutted USAID. And you can look at the lives lost tracker, and it's up to like 600,000 or 700,000 people who've lost lives due to lack of malaria funding, malaria medicine, and all the other things that USAID were doing. Long-termism directly contributed to that. The link is made via Elon Musk. Nothing in MacAskill or Bostrom's or Ord's books would say that Musk should have done anything differently. And that's part of the reason I am so animated about this, because we can look at these quotes from 2011 and be like, that's kind of interesting. But you fast forward 15 years and now it's causing people to die. And so that is partially where my animus comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not true, but I mean, I just don't think Musk is like taking orders from MacAskill or long-termism. Like, I think Musk would have done whatever he did regardless of whether a book was written about long-termism. I mean, that's a hard counterfactual to know, obviously. Like, maybe he read it and keeps it by his, nighttime
what Musk
stand.
Did was what Musk
but
did.
You think he would have mentioned it more than once if that was directly caused the cut to USAID? He
doesn't need to mention it more than once. He just needs to tweet it and say that, I love this philosophy. It's exactly a match to my own philosophy. And what he did was, I quoted it in my blog post against MacAskill. Like, he basically said, just move money away from global development poverties. Just move it away and put it into AI research. I won't push that point any further. We'll let the listener decide if that's valid or not.
The thing falls apart at just the first glance. Like, the whole point of the long-termism stuff is AI safety, and Musk doesn't give a shit about AI safety. He's not funneling money into AI safety orgs. He's funneling it into AI, making grok.
OpenAI was an AI safety org. AI safety, as you know, is also a term that you use.
And Musk is trying to sue them. Like, Musk is on on extremely bad terms with OpenAI.
AI safety,
precisely.
No, AI safety is equivalent to AI research. This is like, if Musk, here's one. If Musk wanted to build the biggest nuclear bomb on the planet, he would talk about nuclear bomb safety. That's how he would do it, because that's how you sell that shit. So AI safety is what AI researchers write about when they're doing AI research. We know someone who's a mutual friend of ours who is a serious, legit researcher who had to write grant applications framing their work in the language of AI safety. This person wrote a DeepMind paper, and it was all about AI safety. Like, this is a grant writing device, because they also think that if they don't build it first, then China is going to build it second. So AI safety is equivalent to AI research. It's just a marketing term.
I think if you take seriously the link between Musk and long-termism, then you have to take seriously the link between Musk and long-termism and ask, like, are any of his other actions aligned with anything else they've written besides this spurious connection?
Well, what about funding the Future of Humanity Institute, which he did? What about...
Is he still doing that?
The Future of Humanity Institute is defunct now, but he funded it while MacAskill was
because
there.
It didn't have funding.
I don't know why it's defunct, but...
because they didn't have funding.
The fact that he didn't continue to fund it does...
Because if he wanted to fund them...
Oh, so he funded them back in the day when MacAskill was writing his book on long-termism. He funded it. Just look at the times.
Yeah. He was at AI, like, he was at EA conferences, like, early back in the day. Again, going against this view that, like, they had this secret AI agenda. Like, no, they were very open about it. And what's happened since?
But it's hidden in plain view. It's not secret. It's secret. It's hidden in plain view. That's the way it's secret. It's not invisible.
It's hidden in plain view. That's how it's secret. Like,
yes.
Okay.
Hidden in plain view.
Why would they have done that? Suppose you're like the 10 people starting all these organizations. Why would you be like, let's have all these conversations in public?
For the same reason that Mother Teresa talked about her stuff in public, because they don't think that there's anything wrong with what they're doing, but they think it doesn't sell very well. And so when they're on MSNBC, they have to talk in one way. And then on their deep forums where no one's going to read it except the core members, they can talk a different way. This is why they do it like that. This is why there was a funnel on their website that was taken off once presumably this reporting came out. Maybe to pivot the conversation slightly and then potentially wind down. I'm curious why you're so interested in defending MacAskill in particular. Is this just him? Like, what has he written after 2015, where he wrote his first book? Like, what paper, what talk has he given? What podcast appearance has he given that you're like, man, this guy's a good thinker? Like, what has impressed you, and why are you so interested in defending someone who I think is writing stuff that is getting people killed.
Oh, it's not about interest, and it's not about whether he's getting people killed. It's about truth. So, like, what do I think is true here? I like to take the personal animus from him out of it. So you're sort of continually making this conflation between like having these bad ideas and openly promoting these bad ideas now, therefore sort of means he was like doing this secretly beforehand. And like, why are you interested in defending that? And yeah, I'm not interested in defending it. Hence why I've arm in arm with you attacked long-termism, and hopefully that buys me some sort of goodwill from listeners and acts as some sort of defense against your view that I'm just some sort of lackey for EA.
No. Of course, no. Sorry, that's sorry.
Well, it was in the Patreon episode. That was like a direct accusation. I just like can't see the truth.
But I don't know why you're so interested in defending these people. But sorry, yeah,
it's not an interest in defending them. It's like she's advancing a case here, and I think that she again summons evidence for shady stuff. And I'll have to think more about the utility monster quote because, that is quite interesting. I think again, if you ask, what would we expect to see if this thesis was true? If they had this explicit agenda.
I expect to see exactly what we see. And
I think not. I think like it's clear this is not what you would have seen, and like they did a lot of weird extraneous stuff. If this was actually their goal all along.
Well, here's a question. So if this thesis was true, that they were writing in plain sight, but when talking to a general wide audience, talking very differently because they wanted to bait and switch and they wanted to funnel. If that was true, if you grant that that's temporarily true for the purpose of this question, what would you expect to see that we aren't seeing? Like what else would you want to see that's not in the paper?
So I would have expected to see much more funding, especially by the organizations that they sort of directly help spin off and that they obviously had a lot of impact over. So I would have expected to see much more funding being sent from those to AI research.
I wouldn't necessarily have expected more. I would expect that the top of the funnel would have more funding than the bottom of the funnel. Oh,
you could still do that with like GiveWell, but like open philanthropy, for instance, is like sitting on billions of dollars. And it's pretty unclear why open philanthropy isn't just sending all their money into AI. Because then GiveWell could just say, oh, well, we do malaria bed nets and everything, and that could be your public face. And like, why do you have also giving what we can and like also all these other organizations? Like it's just it's too much work to do.
No, I'll tell you my answer to this, and you're gonna freaking hate it. But this is here. Okay, so here's something that's completely unfounded, partially unfounded. There's a little bit of evidence for it, but like, I think that like they have this archipelago of like 200 or 300 different organizations. Like, first thing is, if you really cared about being effective, you'd have one organization, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's one of them. You don't have the Foundation for Bill and Melinda Gates. You don't have the Center for the Foundation of Melinda and Bill Gates. You don't have Bill and Gates Ventures, Bill and Melinda Ventures, etc. Because each of these organizations require a whole accounting team, tax filing process, staff, all of this. I think that a lot of these orgs are in existence in order to move money around without paying taxes. That's what I think. I think that if I'm Elon Musk, so Elon Musk funded MacAskill. MacAskill reached out to Elon Musk and said, "Hey, Elon, you're thinking about buying Twitter? I have a great guy you should meet, Sam Bankman-Fried, and you can read the texts." Like Elon Musk is a horrible human being that any 50-minute conversation with him will demonstrate fairly quickly. And if the moral philosopher can't figure that out, then yeah, it makes me doubt his ethics a bit. Peter Thiel funded Miri. Peter Thiel talked about in an interview recently that it's becoming very, very difficult to move money around if you are a wealthy person. Well, you can move your money to your research company via charity and call it a research grant, and that's a great way to move money without paying taxes. And so I think a lot of these orgs are there as a means of moving money from the top to companies that they're interested in investing via this pachinko machine's worth of charity orgs that just get money funded and moved around. And that's how they fund the very technology that they're scared of killing everybody. That's what I think. That's totally unspeculated or That's just speculation. Yeah, so feel free to just completely ignore that. But that's my guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say then you have to posit like a crazy amount of social control of this sort of core group of EA members that you've been mentioning, because all these organs are started by different people. And also GiveWell was actually started before all this stuff, but anyway. But like, and Dustin Moskovitz and Carrie Tuna, which founded OpenPhil, like you'd have to assume that Will MacAskill had social control somehow over them.
MacAskill has huge social control. He's a very powerful human being. MacAskill could call up Elon Musk whenever he wants and say, "Hey, man, what's up?" That's a huge amount of social control. But let's not rabbit hole there. I agree that I can't prove what I'm saying. It's speculation. Yeah. But so like if you're telling me that if this was true, you'd expect there to be more funding for AI and less funding for poverty and development.
Yeah, especially now, because like now AI safety is totally mainstream. So like, why in the past few years would you be sending any money to global development at all? Like, I don't understand. Or any other cause, including the weird ones we've mentioned. That seems super weird. Also, why in 2020 would Ord have written his book? So this is before, and even so Precipice even came out in 2022. So you have two books arguing for long-termism, obviously very publicly facing. In 2020 and 2022, I think ChatGPT 3 came out end of 2022 or beginning of 2023. So right after MacAskill's book came out. So both of these were written before this giant new wave of AI that now has everyone actually concerned about AI safety. Why would they have put their cards on the table at that point? Like, you know, why would they come out publicly swinging for long-termism at that point? I think a much better answer is like, oh, they just became convinced enough of the idea to be like, hey, we got to be public facing about this. We got to write books about this because we think these are important ideas to convince people of. It just does strategically. It wouldn't make sense to do it. Like, it would make sense to do it now that the public is on board with AI safety, but it didn't make sense to do it then when people weren't, and they were controversial books.
Well, I think it took many years to figure out how to brand the message, essentially. Yeah, like, Ord was convinced from the very beginning, as he says in his acknowledgments in The Precipice, that the person who had the most influence over him, the most impact on his thinking, was Nick Bostrom. So Ord was
that doesn't mean he was convinced. That means that means Bostrom had an impact on his thinking. Like,
okay, we'll let the listener decide that.
Well, good Lord, if you're going to quote him, like, quote him right. Holy shit. Ord writes, "The greatest influence on me at Oxford has been Nick Bostrom. I think he introduced me to existential risk the day we met, just after we both arrived here in 2003. We've been talking about it ever since."
I take that as evidence that he was convinced already. If you don't, then we'll leave that one there for sure. But it just took a while. And like, the whole reason this whole conversation got started is because I posted a blog post that MacAskill wrote recently with a sneer. And in that post, he basically says, like, EA stands at a crossroads. We've lost public standing, but now we no longer need to hide our weird ideas, and we can just work on these weird ideas, which he means Bostromism, free and unencumbered. Why didn't they do this earlier? Well, they didn't have Sam Bankman-Fried scandal earlier, and they were still trying to juggle this view of them that they were primarily focused on the long term, or on global poverty. But yeah, that like, if the claim is I would expect to see just more funding in AI, I would just respond, well, there is more funding than there was in 2015. And that's coupled with all the quotes of them saying that this is what they're going to do, coupled with the Robin Hanson quote saying that this is exactly what Yudkowski did do. Then I just don't know how in totality we can take this as anything else than they were doing a Mother Teresa thing with a different mission, essentially. Yeah. But maybe we've exhausted everything that there is to say about this.
Yeah, I think you unfairly maligned his recent article, so I'm just going to quote it because I think a listener will come away thinking you just quoted it, and that was sure. Quite far from what he said. So he says, the EA movement stands at a crossroads. In light of AI's very rapid progress and the rise of the AI safety movement, some people view EA as a legacy movement set to fade away. Others think we should refocus much more on classic, in quotes, cause areas like global health and animal welfare. I argue for a third way. EA should embrace the mission of making the transition to a post-AGI society go well, significantly expanding our cause areas to focus beyond traditional AI safety. This means focusing on these non-traditional causes. So he didn't say. So you made it sound like he said we don't have to hide anymore.
That's true.
Now we can be our true selves. That's not at all what he said. And his writing is totally commensurate with the thesis that EA did have an identity crisis, which I've acknowledged and everyone would acknowledge, like literally everyone in the movement. This is like a huge topic of conversation on the EA forum. If you log on there, half the posts are like, should the AI side of EA split off into its own organization? Because it does get a bit confusing when you're trying to talk to people about it. Like, what does this movement stand for? All this stuff. So these are like well litigated disagreements. None of these disagreements are evidence for or against the view that they knew they were going to create this dynamic early on. And in fact, by creating this dynamic, they've like in some sense sunk many parts of the organization and made it less popular. So it would have been a bad move from that perspective. So anyway, this is just to say this is commensurate with him just being like, okay, here's where EA is. It is confusing. I'm not sure what to do. Here are some ideas.
It's also commensurate with the strategic ambiguity point. But point taken, I did not summarize his piece accurately, so thank you for
I mean, this whole the problem is like the evidence we've been arguing with has been commensurate with like these two different interpretations. And I think that's the issue. And so where I wanted to go was say, okay, if you are correct, what would we expect to see? And I don't think you'd expect all EA to have made all the moves that it's made in the last 15 years for the reasons I've already laid out. You do. And I guess that's where we should leave it.
Yeah. We'll let the listeners decide. Likely, last time you and I hash out EA stuff. Well, maybe not.
Yeah, this might be. This is our John and Glenn debate over Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm getting so sick of this shit.
Yeah. No,
this might end it, dude.
No, nothing will end it. But glad we kicked off 2026 with a good one, and look forward to talking about non-EA related subjects moving forward.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. See you next time.
Cool.